I'll actually try and give you some examples where it may not be IoT, although I will give you an Internet of Things relevant to rugby when I talk about networking in a second. But I just want to really try and tell you some stories. So I'm not going to give you death by PowerPoint on contact center and UC, but I want to talk about maybe some of the things that are going on in the market that will affect us as consumers, but probably more importantly here today will affect you and your customers in terms of the opportunities coming along. So it is a very, very dynamic environment. IoT is the latest thing in hype. We probably underestimate how big it's going to be. We probably overestimate how quickly it's going to happen. That's what normally happens with these hype cycles. But it certainly is having an impact. And in fact, I'll give you an example just now before I start, which was I was going to mention under networking. But in the other place, and when you're in Twickenham, the other place is the Millennium Stadium. We've recently just embarked upon changing their network because they're adopting an Internet of Things down there. This all came about because they wanted to update the network for electronic point of sale, because anybody who's been to the Millennium, you have to pay cash for anything. So you want a pint of Brains beer, it's cash. You can't actually do it with your card. So they're upgrading the network down there. But one of the things we did was to bring about the Internet of Things for them, in that as well as rugby, they host a lot of live events there, and the lighting can sometimes be quite toxic to the camera crews in terms of when you pan a camera around, you get sort of flare and stuff like that. So you can't actually provide great sports coverage from it. So the lights are all connected as the Internet of Things to the network right now, and the network is intelligent enough to know which camera's live and where it's pointing, and to adjust the light balance of all the lights that happen to be in the zone of that camera's lens. So that's an example of the Internet of Things that you probably wouldn't see day to day, but it is actually having an impact in terms of more and more things connecting up. But that wasn't what I was going to talk about. I do have a Jawbone, a Fitbit. It is in a drawer because I've replaced it with an Apple Watch. So you didn't ask that question, but they do still sort of work. What I want to talk about, though, is just a few things that Avaya's involved with. And the first one is contact center. We're very, very well known for that. But I want to give some examples of actually what's going on in our world and our customers' world that's changing and evolving, because this is going to impact us as consumers. It's going to impact you as businesses and how you actually use technology. So what's going on with contact center for some time now? It moved from call center to contact center so people can get in touch in any way that they particularly choose. And those sort of omni-channel contact centers are getting better now at allowing, when your inquiry reaches an operator, they sort of know how you got there, what you were looking at, where you were browsing, and all the rest of it. So context is now arriving. But what we're beginning to do now, though, is to answer the what if in terms of what's going on. So I'm going to give you some examples of that. So we recently bought out some middleware for our contact center users, a thing called EDP, another three-letter acronym. It's the Engagement Development Platform. But I'm not going to talk to you about that. I'm going to talk to you about a customer and something they wanted to do. So the customer is actually T-Mobile in Germany, mobile service provider. And they have a contact center there which takes calls. And normally it's because someone either can't get a signal or because their bill's wrong or they don't understand what's on there or they want to change their plan. And every time they have an interaction with the customer in terms of, person to person through their contact center, they ask the customer to score them. And it's a 1 to 5 scoring mechanism. And they found out that if they got a 3 or less, when it came up to renewal time, 85% chance that they're not going to renew because they've had a bad experience and they're not going to come back. That's the behavior of a millennial. We're not faithful anymore. We chop and change and do things like that. So somebody in their business says, well, wouldn't it be good if every time we had a score that was 3 or less, next time they called up, we routed them to a retention specialist that actually had the context of what their bad experience was last time and answered the call with, I see that last time you phoned us, you didn't have a good experience. You only gave us a 3 because we didn't get this thing sorted out for you. This time I want to delight you to try and get it working for you. So either gone to a specialist rather than a regular operator. And it's all because somebody said, wouldn't it be good if? And then through things like Engagement Development Platform, you can actually then link that up to your CRM system, your CLI system, your contact center, and you can start to answer some questions like that. So that's an example, I think, of how technology is evolving, how middleware is coming in to try and change experiences. And that's just one example. There's another one we did for a university in the States, Michigan State University, whereby it's a very, very large campus, and being America, they have to legislate for everything, and they had a very, very complex servicing system for all the elevators on campus, and it's quite a high-rise sort of campus. And basically, they were spending the best part of $1 million a year in terms of having maintenance crews on campus. Then in the event a lift got stuck, someone pressed a button, whereas we'd sit there patiently and hum to ourselves or do something on our phone. In the States, in Michigan, you have to get to that elevator within a particular period of time, or you get fined as a sort of a public authority. And basically what they did there is they got the actual students to sort of say, well, how would we change this? And somebody was saying, well, wouldn't it be good if, when someone pressed that button, rather than it going to some sort of call centre calling out an emergency crew, that it alerted whichever the security guard was on campus that was nearest to that, because we know where they are. And to really join up things and actually use resources that were there, use them intelligently. So someone came to the door of the elevator, the shaft of the elevator, and said, look, we know you're in there, the crew's on there, where we're getting stuff sorted out. It actually saved them $1 million a year, and it cost them about 10 pizzas to develop it, because they did like a Skunk Works event with the students to actually get them to develop that thing using EDP. So there are things that are changing now where you can almost imagine something, wouldn't it be good if, but then you can start to connect up your contact center, your telephony system, your CRM system, your database, whatever it is that gives you a feed and informs your business. This is the type of things you can do right now. So things are developing pretty rapidly. And the good thing is that whilst that's right now is to preserve the sort of high-end enterprises that have large contact centers, what you're seeing is that all of this is coming down to the broader base of the market. And Johan, my colleague, will talk about mid-market sort of following me. But you'll see that this type of capability and functionality will be available to everybody in a very, very short period of time. So things are moving very, very rapidly. The other thing that's happening in contact center is that video is beginning to appear there. And I want to give you an example of something we're doing for a UK retail bank that's very, very big in the mortgage sector. Typically, when any of us, walk in to get a mortgage, or of our kids now sort of walking in to get mortgages, you tend to walk in, your first port of call is where you bank. You're banking your building society that maybe your parents opened that account for you many, many years ago. And you walk into a branch and say, me and my girlfriend, we're thinking about getting a flat. What do I do? Now, this is a very, very highly regulated environment, so they're actually quite restrained in how they can respond to that. But basically, all they can do is make an appointment for you to see a mortgage specialist, which is appropriately sort of authorised to have that conversation with you. And this particular bank was suffering something they call branch leakage, where someone walks in and says, I'd like to take out a mortgage with you, I bank with you. And basically they're saying, well, that's great, our mortgage expert will be in this branch a week on Thursday, he's got a slot at 10 o'clock. And they make an appointment. It is as archaic as that, and this is a leading British bank that we're all shareholders in. And so this particular bank is no exception. Other building societies banks have the same sort of thing. They don't all have specialists in branch. It's highly regulated, so you can only speak to a specialist. So we were working with them in terms of how can we help you with this branch leakage? Because the reality is that something like 65% of those people don't come back because they walk in somewhere else, got an appointment sooner, and they pursue that and they move then on to an offer stage. So what we did, we took the concept of their contact centre, which we run for them already. They have a very, very large contact centre across the UK. But we worked on the concept of putting video into the branch. So imagine walking into a branch, having that conversation, I want to apply for a mortgage, and someone says, OK, I'm going to route you to an agent right now, but you're physically sort of standing there. And effectively, they treat it like an inbound call to a contact centre. You say who you are, so they've got your account details, and they then route you to an authorised agent that can actually handle that transaction for you. But they do it over video. So you're almost using contact centre technology in terms of intelligent call routing, but you're taking them to a specialist that sits in a centre that doesn't have to travel around from branch to branch to branch, that is there that day at that time, or will be available in 5 minutes' time, in the same way that you would with an agent in terms of music on hold, there'll be an agent with you in 5 minutes, you're 17 in the queue. So that's a very, very simple thing where you're taking video into that sort of contact centre, but then actually keeping the context of that call. So when they go home, you go home, you speak to your partner, I went and applied for the mortgage today, they need you to go on there because we're going to do it in joint names. You can then go back in that event via your iPad or whatever, so you have a ubiquitous sort of communication with that bank. So that's another example of stuff that's actually going on that's affected on the high street, will affect us, will affect our children, will affect our businesses. And they've been testing that for quite some time now, to check that people are comfortable doing that. Most of us here as consumers of technology or in the technology business would be relatively comfortable doing that, but I guess we don't represent the majority. But people are actually finding once they've done it once, it's not a problem, because people are getting used to Skype and other things like that in terms of interacting through video. So very, very clever, but just joining stuff up in terms of somebody said, wouldn't it be good if when someone came into this bank and they did that, we could put them in front of an agent straight away. So we're using technology to augment that and to make that happen. So there's another example for you there that's very, very real that's coming to the high street. In terms of UC, there is a bit of a revolution, a bit of an evolution sort of going on. I'm followed by Mitel, who's a competitor of us in this market. Probably a lot of people using Skype. We might be using WhatsApp for video. There's a lot of things that are coming along now which compete with traditional sort of unified communications. But they tend to do it more in a point-to-point sort of way. Whereas UC now is becoming, I think, more ubiquitous, and what we're beginning to see is how all of these things thread back in together. And I had the benefit of being actually in Facebook over in California a few weeks ago. We did a study tour with some customers there, and it was quite an odd experience because it's the old Sun Microsystem campus, and I worked for them for 15 years. And what was even funny is when you came out and they said, "Should we take your photograph by the Facebook sign?" I was more interested in looking around the back of it because it was still the Sun Microsystems stand behind that. But they were showing us things with Facebook Messenger, where they were talking about how millennials are, interacting with their technology. If you've got kids, you'll sort of know this. And basically where people now are looking across social media to inform themselves, to make decisions, to guide them towards a decision. And then, of course, you get to a point where, you decide you actually want to make this transaction. I was talking to Johan the other day. I think his sons are choosing new football boots for the season, but it's almost, they're looking at their mates, they're looking at what their favourite player at Chelsea or wherever is wearing, and they're sort of doing all of that to try and get to a decision point. But they get to a point where they almost like want to push to talk, or they want to push to interact to actually make that sort of purchase. And what we're doing at Avaya is making sure that when that call lands onto the contact centre, be it for a phone call, be it a web interaction, whatever, it arrives with that context. So you know how someone got to that decision, why they've turned up, why they want to make that call. And what's going on in UC is if somebody doesn't do that from their mobile, if they don't do that from their landline, is we're making sure that it doesn't actually matter where that call comes from, that it's going to land with context. And so that whoever the recipient of that call is going to be able to deal with it intelligently in terms of, I know you wanted the boots that Ronaldo's wearing in the silver. We haven't got that, but we've got something that's a very dark metallic grey. Straight into a conversation. You're not going to lose the customer. You're having a meaningful dialogue, and you can retain that customer. It's a real example of the type of things that are going on. And the other thing, as I said in contact centre, this functionality is pushing down the market. This used to be the reserve of the very, very large, complex, unified comm solutions which are out there. But now that's coming down, is available to literally sort of mom-and-pop shops with, five or six users. I mean, Johan will talk about, IP Office, the offering we have to Midmarket, which is up to about 2,000 users for us in the UK. But this is available now to tiny sort of startups as well in terms of the things you can do, and Johan will touch on that. So, that is sort of the evolution of what's happening. Everything's going to be available to everybody. It's dumbing down. But we're now actually getting more relaxed about having inbound coming in from whatever the device is, because, it may be, Facebook Messenger's probably not big yet. They bought WhatsApp. WhatsApp is bigger. Something else is going to turn up next. Instagram will start doing phone calls. Who knows what it's going to be? I can't guess. If you want to know, ask a young child, because they've probably got a better idea in terms of what's coming down. Or ask Mark, because Mark's a futurologist, so you probably can, some stuff you can bet on for that. The other thing that's happening, though, is the way that people are going to consume these technologies is changing. Here's another thing that's on a hype cycle or whatever: cloud. Cloud has been talked about for many, many years now. And I guess it's still, I think the hype is sort of still going up. The reality is it's taking longer than anybody ever thought to become a reality. I think we're still underestimating how big it's going to be, because that's a classic sort of adoption curve of these things that happen. But I just want to talk to you a little bit about what we're doing, because we're trying to do something a little bit different to appeal, to make the technology accessible to more people. So we're starting to build cloud solutions. There are three sorts that we do. We do sort of private cloud solutions. So, if you're a big multinational bank, you don't particularly want to have a hybrid or a private cloud. You want to own everything on there. It needs to be very, very private and secure to you. So, in conjunction with our partners, we build, private cloud services. You get sort of, we've got some service providers that are building out some clouds. We did a big one with BT Wholesale, which is accessible to resellers. Some of our partners, I think Britannica, are actually looking at this as well, are building their own sort of cloud solutions, are looking at doing that. So these tend to be sort of more hybrid cloud, where they're sort of ring-fenced and they're not completely public, but they're accessible to just sort of select customers who want to go on there. And then we're doing some pure partner-hosted ones where anybody can sort of sign up. You can almost go and buy this and provision this online. The reality is the uptake is slow, it's modest, it's cautious. We've got our first customers running across a number of these clouds right now, and I think last week I signed up another 30 million cloud deal to go and build something with a very large established contact center partner in the UK. But the take-up is slow. I mean, we said for 15 it's going to be about 5% share. That feels about right. Next year it could double, maybe a bit more. The year after that it may start to ramp up. But I bet I'm probably overestimating on that based upon experience. You know, I was involved in the mid-90s in terms of the internet. We all said it was going to be way bigger than it was. We all said it was going to happen much faster, but we never ever predicted how big it was. We never ever predicted the Internet of Things. So what I want to talk about is just the things we're doing that's a little bit different to give a true consumption model, because the problem with most cloud solutions or utility solutions is that you're sort of, in the past, you've been buying it on the drip. You know, because whoever it was selling it, whether it was us, whether it was a partner, you know, we had to get our money back. We had to stay in business sort of doing it. So we had to sort of spread out the costs, and you as an end user customer would be, you know, somehow cajoled into a minimum commit for a minimum period of time. So this thing made financial sense. So what we're doing now is that we're actually sort of changing that, we're changing that model, and this is what we offer out to the market, and it's beginning to go down very well. So it's called an average high watermark pricing, but basically what it's meant to do is true consumption. So it's based on what it was you used in that month or that period. That is what we charge you for. Because typically in a contact center, if you look here, you know, this is a typical customer. It's basically, there's a number of weeks stacked together. You know, it starts off quite busy on a Monday, it slackens off in the middle of the week, it gets a bit busier towards the end of the week, and the weekend it falls away. Classic contact center, that's 110 users, so you've got to license 110 users, you've got to have 110 stations, and you pay for that, you maintain for that, year in, year out. It's not very flexible. The 111th call goes on hold, the 112th call goes on hold, and so on and sort of so forth. So if you want to go and consume that in the cloud, what does that look like? Do you go and provision and build out a 110 user system? Absolutely not. What you do is that you actually consume the license. So you take a license token as you deal with a call, and you release that token when the call finishes. So in reality, this one actually is a 71 user system in terms of what you actually pay for. So not 110, 71, a 35% saving. And where that's working on some international customers, that they're consuming licenses around the globe. So as the UK shuts down, or Europe shuts down, and Asia Pac sort of starts to, no, the US starts, when the world goes that way. As the US starts to open up, it's almost the licenses get picked up from around the world. So it just reduces the average high watermark quite dramatically. So some big international banks that may have 30,000 contact center users, at any one time, there are only about 12,000 which are active. So the reality there, where you have a global business, is that you never get beyond about 12,000 licenses. It's, you know, it's a half to a third of what it is they're using. Now that's in a sort of a fairly typical sort of contact center where it's, you know, the heartbeat's there. It happens every week. It's fairly similar. But if you're in retail, if you're in travel, one of our customers, TUI, recently, you know, we've had another air disaster out in Sharm el-Sheikh. There was one in Tunisia early in the year. You would not believe the spikes that hit their contact centers and the work that we all collectively do behind the scenes to make sure these things don't break at the time. But then, you know, in these businesses, you have massive spikes as well. And this is the time when you want to be most responsive to a customer. If you've got a family that's stuck out in Sharm el-Sheikh right now, they want to know when they're going to get home. You know, the load on the contact center is absolutely phenomenal. And in this basis, you could actually absorb that peak because you can just flood the network with licenses. The contact center licenses can be picked up on a normal UC sort of phone. You can expand your business, you know, like a set of bellows as you need to at that point in time. And in this case, the savings are even greater. So I think we're showing here a peak of about 161. The reality is the average high watermark is 81. It's half. We're doing something right now for a British utility. And we've actually just gone and probed their network, their contact center, to see what it is. And the savings they're going to make week on week is they're going to have 45% less licenses, because the reality is that's how people are actually using their service. And they're having to stand up something 24/7, but the reality is they only need 55% of what they've actually got there. So that's a very, very big change. So we call it average high watermark pricing. I think it's the first true sort of consumption model that's out there. That's what say the BT wholesale offer is, which is out to partners or to you through partners, and that's what our other partners are actually building out there. So true consumption, very low barrier to entry, very low minimum amount of times, and what we're finding is that people are either saying, you know what, I can completely trust my contact center to the cloud, or I'll trust my peaks to the cloud. In other words, I'll have something on-prem, which I pay for conventionally. I'll sweat that asset down. But what I'll do is I'll have an extra 25% capacity, which I will consume on demand through the cloud. So we're moving to true utility now. It's taken the industry a long time to get there, but I think you'd agree this is a much better way to do it. Easy to get in, easy to get out. You pay for what you use. So that's the way we've moved that. So finally on networking. I come from a networking background. I spent 12 years at the company that is obviously now found its niche, putting cows on the internet, which I sort of get that, but bizarrely. But I spent sort of 12 years there, and I was involved in networking through from the mid-90s through to sort of later on in the 2000s. And it was interesting to sort of come up into that market at that time, in that in the mid-90s, networking was pretty fragmented. You had, Cisco doing pretty good core routing stuff, and they had some edge routing, but then companies such that with Avaya now, and people like Nortel and stuff were doing very well in the edge routing as well. But everything was a bit more fragmented. There was different stuff going on at distribution layers. Security wasn't the issue it was then. There was nothing really going on in the data center. But then Cisco rocked up and said, this is all about end-to-end networking, that we'll do LAN and we'll do WAN. So we'll redefine what it is we do. Whereas 3Com were really in the LAN, they had a little bit of wide area networking. Cisco basically said, well, let's just put our stakes in the ground a little bit wider than anybody else. Good set of products. The products weren't any better than anybody else's products. I'm sure there were point products that were better from elsewhere. But they sort of redefined it and said, look, rather than having it red, blue, purple, green, yellow, all these different bits you put in your network, why don't you airbrush the whole thing to the blue? And trust me, it worked really, really well. It was great. The internet was going up. They were very successful in making themselves synonymous with the internet. But then things have moved on and things have evolved. And what we've seen going on over it's probably for the last 10 years, since the mid-2000s, is the whole networking landscape has started to fragment again. You saw people like HP come into the market and sort of commoditize the edge. In other words, so LAN switching and basically said, look, it's just a LAN switch. It has a lifetime guarantee, sits on the edge of your network, it has power, it doesn't need to be that smart. And Cisco saw how that sort of affected the edge of their network, so it commoditized there. In distribution layers, other companies sort of came in, and sort of standards started to slip in terms of having been completely open, you could buy it all from one place. The market started to fragment as well. And then networking in the data center became something that was much more demand for that, in that people now wanted to go from a server in a data center all the way out to the wiring closet, back in to the blade on the next slot in the same rack, or to the rack alongside that. So they started talking about east-west switching, where you very quickly network within a data center itself. So again, that fragmented the market, brought other players in. And if you think of the financial services market, they love something called low latency switching, which means it's fast, which means that they can race ahead of trades, get to a trade. They can see someone wants to buy something over here. They get there just before they buy it. They buy it at a price, they take a margin. It's just arbitrage. And that's how millions sort of flow through the City of London and all the rest of it. And so as a result, the whole market is fragmented. And then you've got the Internet of Things, whereby all of a sudden we're putting cows on the internet, we're putting Fitbits on the internet, all of these things which will or won't take off to any sort of great degree. But it will happen. It'll be bigger than we ever thought of. We will probably all be chipped or something for healthcare reasons in the future at birth. I don't know. It could happen. Think back 20 years ago. If I think back at Sheffield Hallam University, I think 20 years ago, I had to do like a futurologist pitch. And I couldn't do one, but I just rewound 10 years and said, this is where we were. A mobile phone was the size and the weight of a breeze block. And so who knows where we're going to be? And that was just 10 years previously when I gave that pitch. But so the networking market has sort of completely fragmented. Is it time for a change? You have the conventional sort of 6-layer models. It's unwieldy. If you want to plug the Internet of Things onto that network, you have to define all sorts of routes. It's multiple levels. There's a lot of command line stuff goes in. Then you have to say, well, if that route breaks, I have to define another route. And if that route breaks, I have to define another route. And it's become too clunky because the Internet's getting busier. There's more and more things we want to connect. And we want to do some of this what if. Wouldn't it be good if, when the camera pointed over there, it turned that light down? And the light's connected to the Internet. We can see where the camera's pointing. You can do that. So what Avaya's come out? We've come out with a thing called fabric networking. So fabric, think of a Hessian blanket. You throw it over your business. It's touching everything in your business, whether it's a light switch, a thermostat, a device, a mobile device, or whatever. Everything is touched by that fabric in that business. And everything can be provisioned at the edge. So when it touches that fabric, it provisions itself. So whether it's a telephone, whether it's a wireless device or whatever, you can actually touch the fabric and do it, whereas you don't have to go and define all of these complexities. So that's something that I think you'll sort of see coming up. We're having a lot of success with our customers on that now, but you'll see that sort of taking off, and Avaya's making a very, very large push in that market because people want to provision in a different way. People are moving away from that model, and I think we've probably got about a 2-year jump on that. But you'll see fabric or fabric networking come to the fore, and that's really what it means in terms of what's going on. So I'd certainly commend that to you. So that's really what I wanted to talk about. I'll just finish off on another thing. I guess this is an IoT thing and it's a networking thing. This is to do with wireless. when you're trying to train your people and teach your people and sort of talk to customers, normally it's death by PowerPoint. It's all technology and stacks and switches and how they work. And somebody was talking about, it was on wireless access points. There'd be some in this room here. We're all sort of sharing a network. And there's almost how you can put policy on an access point, which is starting to get a bit dull. But I had an experience of policy on an access point the other day. We were over for our sales conference in Las Vegas, and we got there early, so we're going to go shopping. So it's a fairly normal activity. One of the normal activities when you go to Vegas. And I got outside the hotel, and I'm a great fan of Uber because I like riding a big black car for the same price as you do in a normal taxi or something like that. So that works well. So I get outside the reception of the MGM Grand. I go onto Uber. Nothing happens. There's just the little wheels going round. What's going on here? So I sort of, reset my phone, do it again. I suddenly realised I'm having policy inflicted on me. Then I remember they've got our network and they've got our access points in there. And what it was, the MGM Grand, they get $1 for every taxi that picks up a fare in front of that hotel. Trust me, that's worth millions. There were probably 40 cabs outside there at the time, and it was a constant sort of flow. They get $1 for every one. So Uber, they don't get a cent for that. So they'd actually inflicted policy on me as a user, smart enough to switch my Wi-Fi off and do it over 4G, so I still got my Uber cab, but I had to go to the curb to get it. I couldn't do it at reception. But that's the type of thing. So we're beginning to see how the Internet of Things is changing things. We're beginning to see how people are using networks and contact centre and UC in a much more intelligent sort of case, and that's really what I commend to you. So I'm going to hand over to my Welsh colleague. Johan's just going to talk about how this sort of relates to the mid-market.
Thanks, Simon. Cheers, thank you. So thanks very much, Jonathan and team, for inviting me up. I'm really only going to be a couple of minutes on the mid-market. Simon alluded to the mid-market in some of his presentation earlier. So the mid-market for Avaya, I look after the EU, is 1 to 2,000 type market segment. It's big. It's 98% of all organisations globally, certainly true in the EU. Traditionally, you take a 500 user organisation, a 250, a 750. The Internet of Things, the millennials are in the workplace, Generation X, my kids are 14 and 17, I'll mention them again in a minute. They're Generation X, they're coming into the workplace. The way they work, their expectation on you and the way that they want to consume your services or buy your products has changed. So the challenges you face are just the same as the high-end, multi-global international organisations are doing. Some of the stuff Simon touched on, omni-channel, digitalisation. But taking that high end and moving it into what was deemed the mid-market, we call it commercial, has been very costly. It takes a lot of your resources up, huge budgets. Times have changed. And Avaya have looked at it over the last couple of years and taken the core of our portfolio, the IP office, and made that fit for purpose. So it's got all the functionality, redundancy, capability as a high-end enterprise, but designed for ease of installation, single stack solution, which I'll mention, but actually offers you everything a high-end enterprise portfolio would have done. So a changing environment, I put this stat up there. The telephone to reach 50 million people, 75 years, there's no surprises there. The TV, 13 years. Of late, internet, 4 years. Facebook, 3.5 years. Anyone idea how an app can reach 50, how long it takes an app, Snapchat, WhatsApp, to reach 50 million people? Jonathan, go on, I'm going to pick on you. Have a guess. Oh, really? You looked at the slides earlier. So and that's decreasing. Less than 30 days for 50 million people. Those are your kids, my kids, sometimes us. An app goes out that will offer them something unique. 50 million people in less than 30 days. That's just going to decrease. It's going to come down to single-digit days. But depending on the app, they may want to talk to you and your business using this different app. It's a constant changing environment. Mark touched on it. In terms of what's coming in the future. So for you as a business, it's a constant change. How are you going to constantly communicate and do business with your future clients? It's changing daily, weekly, certainly monthly. The other challenge we're facing, or you guys are facing, we're aware of it, is in your organisation, you're going to constantly employ younger and younger people as they come into the workforce. Just a standard evolution. So my eldest is 17. 5 years he'll be in the workspace. He's going to come with his mobile phone, whatever device they're using in 5 years' time. That's what he wants. He'll expect to be able to use that at work. He'll expect the apps. He'll be expecting to communicate internally on it and externally on it. So you as an organisation have got multiple challenges. Clearly, there's cloud and cloud-based. The way you may want to communicate internally, the way you may want to communicate externally. Data, storage, analytics, profiling your organisations and customers. Apps constantly being developed and pushed out. All of us are here today. The majority of us will have a smartphone, maybe a tablet. You're running your businesses on it. You can do all your email, you can make your phone calls, you can respond, you might do video calls. A day out at a conference like this is no major impact on your business whatsoever because you're able to communicate constantly. Devices. I think Mark touched on it towards his last slide where his last point was engagement, but connect your channels and devices was a comment that came out on Mark's slide at the end. How true. But you've got split challenges. You've got to look after your team and allow your team who work for you, your employees, to be able to communicate anytime, anywhere, any device. Road warriors are on the road, home workers, remote workers, satellite offices, global offices, core office, home office. It's a challenge. How do you constantly get that? Keep it secure, keep it real time on any device through multimedia. Your second challenge is you've got me as a consumer, and I'll tend to do some web searching, find out the product I want. I still like to be able to speak to someone, double check what I'm buying. Simon alluded to my two sons, just finishing at school rugby, about to go into football. Both avid sportsmen. Clearly, a rugby boot isn't good enough for a football, according to them. It was fine my day. So they're now searching for Christmas for their football boot. Unfortunately, they support Chelsea. So now they're looking at the boots the Chelsea players wear, and they're searching. They're searching multiple websites, narrowed down the boot, the colour, the name to get engraved, and the companies that can do it. They will do the whole sales cycle without speaking to anyone. But if something goes wrong with that order, or it doesn't arrive the next day, or there's an email that comes out, the first thing that I would do or my children would do, pick up the phone. So you've still got, as Simon alluded to, underlying UC. That has to be there. But on top of that is this omni-channel experience everyone refers to. Whether they've IM'd you, they've gone on Facebook, they've done it through WhatsApp, website. The Johan McRae experience, you should be capturing that. When it comes to an agent, you know what I've looked at, through what medium, at what time, what my search is. You've got my entire history to your agent. The agent's better communicate. Or you could push a suggested product to me. That is a massively challenging environment. And in our view, it's going to get worse because of the way technology, and Mark touched on innovation to reach technology trends. Constant. So what are we at Avaya doing? I mentioned the high-end enterprise suits and body globals, but what we've looked at is a complete solution. So the only product I'm going to mention, Simon touched on it, is IP Office. That is our core UC platform at the base of what we do in the mid-market space. But on side of that, and if you go to the Avaya stand in the far side of the room next door, we've got the video up there, Scopia. But that's true collaboration. I use that 6 or 7 hours every single day, but it doesn't matter where I am or what device I'm on, I'm communicating to my team. But that allows you to communicate internally, you to communicate externally. Tesla was brought up by Mark. Actually, we do all the work with Tesla globally. Actually, what they want, that SOS button in your car when you're broken down or there's an emergency and you communicate to Tesla's contact center. That'll also be video. It's going to be law to car manufacturers in the next few years. So all the Avaya technology. It's taking a product suite. Simon alluded to networking, Fabric Connect, SDN. But on networking, it isn't so much the LAN anymore, it's the wireless. BYOD is changing to BYOE, bring your everything. That's my children. They want to choose what device, and they'll expect an employee or employer to offer it, and they'll be expecting the customers to be able to use that as well. So that's a massive challenge. So within that, you've got security, ID engines. Simon alluded to it. What apps will you or won't you allow on your premises? MGM Grand, not ordering the taxis. You have to use the ones outside. But tying that ID down, going to get massively more challenging. Mobility, We've spoken about that. You're all here today. How are you communicating to your colleagues? How are you communicating to your customers? Multimedia ways. And lastly, the contact centre, that omni experience I've spoken about, taking the Johan McRae experience and to an agent. So, oh yes, I see you were looking at the Adidas boots in this colour. This isn't great. You're absolutely right. We don't have it in stock, but they won't be delivered tomorrow, but in 2 days' time. Is that okay? Fine. We'll give you a free gift voucher worth £5 for your next purchase for the inconvenience. Thank you very much. I haven't said a word, and they've known everything about my experience. Wrapped all around that, and what's unique is that is a single vendor. Avaya do all of that. It's all integrated together. It's our product set. It's not third party. We wrap all of that with our partner services. So Britannic are a long-standing Avaya partner, all with the certifications of their own service wrap. Pre-sales, configuration, installation, management. But it's one vendor. So there isn't it's a network issue. No, it's not. It's a wireless issue. That you need the contact center. No, it's the PBX. How many times have you got multi-vendors pointing at each other, but the cause root of your issue is still inherent on your network or on your voice infrastructure? We designed this completely from bottom up, available to one user, all the way up to 2,500 users, and obviously it migrates straight into our enterprise portfolio on the Aura platform. One vendor, one partner network. And what Britannic can ride around, and that is their integration, obviously the SIP capabilities they bring. So it's very, very powerful. The last thing I mentioned, that can be deployed as a CPE, traditional on-site. It could be to a managed service via Britannic, or it could be deployed as the cloud, consumed as OPEX or CAPEX. So if you look at the full stack solution to take care of the ever-changing environment today and tomorrow, the way it can be deployed, the way it can be consumed, please do come and see the Avaya guys at the end, or myself and Simon, if you want further information on what Simon discussed, or myself, or the Jonathan and his team. But if there's any questions, queries, do feel free. It is something that we are avid on in Avaya in terms of driving forward and scaling from that single user to those tens and tens of thousands global customers, but being able to offer full solution, full capability at the right commercial point, depending on your size, vertical, or needs. Jonathan, once again, thanks very much indeed for your time, and hopefully I'll see you throughout the day. Thanks very much.